What I'd like to talk to you about today is parallel advice with HTAs, and this is the structure of what I'm going to talk about. We'll look first at the rationale and impact of parallel advice. Very quickly, just look at and put it in the context of European level landscape for advice. Then we'll go on to the new procedure, and it's a bit process orientated because I want to just give you this overview, but we'll go on, look at the HTA roles and actors, a bit outline of the process and what the outcomes are, what we've seen since the launch of this new procedure for parallel interactions with HTAs, and some key messages. So starting with the background and the rationale, regulators and HTAs in parallel advice come together to discuss the plan development. And this initiative is because we know that regulators and HTAs have different decisions to make and different evidence requirements. So there is a risk that these evidence requirements can diverge. So you can have parallel developments and multiple and complex plans and trials. So the idea with this interaction is that these different decision makers and advisors come together and discuss an evidence generation plan so that there is some commonality and agreement about a single development plan that can meet the needs of the different decision makers. And this is the added benefit of this parallel interaction, where these different decision makers and advisors are coming together before plans have been made concrete. And ultimately, this means that we want to have a reduction for reasons why why plans fail when it comes to marketing authorization and reimbursement appraisal. We want to reduce avoidable reasons for failure, so that there won't be a failure based on because you haven't collected the right evidence. There may be other reasons why our decisions diverge ultimately, but it shouldn't be because you haven't collected the right evidence for the different decision makers. So the platform has been recently relaunched for EUnetHTA, and this is a platform of equal opportunities, or equal partners between EMA and EUnetHTA. For EMA, this is the EMA scientific advice and dovetails very well with our ongoing normal scientific advice, as you've heard about it. And EUnetHTA is a partnership of different HTA bodies in Europe. And this is run under the Joint Action 3 platform to facilitate cooperation on HTA in Europe. And this is co-funded by European Commission in their efforts to defragment and facilitate cooperation amongst HTA bodies. Right. Okay. So the new platform builds very much on the previous initiatives, where we've had the previous platform for parallel advice, which is that going around from left to right, EMA, HTA, parallel advice. There was also what's called a SEED initiative, which was also funded by the European Commission, which stands for Shaping Early European Dialogues. And then also EUnetHTA also had some early dialogues when their HTAs were getting together on their own to talk and give advice under Joint Action 2. So all of these initiatives have been put together, and we've talked at length about how best to do this, and we've come up with this new platform. And this replaces the previous platform that was in existence. So the guidance has been replaced, and now we have the new guidance for parallel consultation. But we did look and review at the impact of parallel advice as much as we could, given that development timeframes are quite long. So we looked at a cohort of 31 procedures and looked at how the commonality stacked up between regulators and HTAs. So the blue bars are full agreement, and the red ones are partial agreement, and the green ones are disagreement. But certainly you can see for population, which is one on the left, endpoints, one in the middle. If you put together partial agreement and full agreement, there certainly is over 80% commonality, which means that a single development plan trial was agreed or agreeable between regulators and HTAs. It's less so for comparator, which is that you would expect possibly one of the areas where there might be most divergence, but it's still pretty good when you put together the agreement and partial agreement. So it's quite It takes a long time to track procedures all the way through the system, but I can reassure you that we are looking to track these cohort of 31 procedures as they go through marketing authorization and reimbursement to really see what happened at the next stage. So we did have over 100 procedures in this previous platform. So, as I mentioned, we wanted to put this in context of the European level advice landscape. So there are three offerings here: regulatory advice, parallel consultation, and HTA advice. So by regulators' advice, I mean normal standard scientific advice, which Jan has just told you all about. But notably, HTAs can also be invited as an observer to a certain procedure, which would be agreed, and you'd be notified about this. Then in the middle, we have parallel consultation, regulators and HTAs, and I'll go into more detail. There are two variants of this, which I'll just float that at the moment. For when HTAs take part, we have what's called consolidated, PCC, parallel consultation consolidated, and PCI, parallel consultation individual, and I'll explain this clearly for you shortly. And on the right, there is also at the European level HTA advice, which is given as a sort of consolidated version, and EMA have been invited as observers, and all the confidentiality undertakings have to be signed. So just another comment on this. So on the left, regulatory advice and parallel consultation. When and if you look at the box at the bottom here, for the EMA participation, the eligibility criteria, fee incentives and so on, and legal basis are the same for the EMA, whether you take part in regulatory advice or in parallel consultation. And the CHMP letter that comes out at the end has the same standing and is a substantive CHMP scientific advice. So going on to the new procedure. This is a new procedure between EMA and UNETA, and it is a streamlined procedure, and there are also increased opportunities to facilitate understanding, problem solving, and reduction of divergences between EMA and the HTA bodies with a more structured interaction compared to the older platform. And there is also improved coordination and greater participation of HTA bodies through some of the structures that have been put in place, one of which is called the Early Dialogue Working Party for HTAs and the UNETA Early Dialogue Secretariat. So a couple of the features to highlight. So starting up at the top left and going across the top line, we have deadlines for submission of letter of intent and draft briefing document, which have been shortened compared to the older platform, and these are very much tied in with the published normal scientific advice. And we ask for a briefing document 30 days before the start of the procedure, and a letter of intent a month before that. There is a single gateway, so you only need to send one letter to the same letter to both EMA and to UNETA Early Dialogue Secretariat. We operate under joint guidance and joint templates. There is possibility to have a pre-submission during the procedure, but if you're thinking about that, you need to be maybe a little bit more organised and send in an earlier briefing document so we can have enough time to bring in this loop as well. And maybe this is more important to SMEs who are maybe very unfamiliar and very uncertain about what they're going to put in as a value proposition perhaps, or questions, or the applicant's positions that would be appropriate for the different decision makers. The HTA recruitment is done centrally by the UNETA Secretariat, and this is a really big step forward compared to the previous platform, whereas previously each individual company, if they wanted parallel advice, had to go around the houses to the different HTA bodies and to collect and ask about participation. So now this is much simpler, much more streamlined. And the UNETA Early Dialogue Secretariat, which is based at HTAs in France, French HTA, is the point of contact for this recruitment and for other aspects relating to the procedure. So there, as I mentioned, there are two variants, PCI, the individual one, and the consolidated one, and this is applied by the Early Dialogue Working Party. And then also we have built into the procedure more opportunities for interaction, closed interaction between regulators and HTAs. Now, I'm going to go on to who are the actors and the roles of the different HTA people involved in this. I'm not going to cover any of the regulatory ones because Jan's already done that. So first off is the UNETA ED Secretariat. They are the contact point, and they will look at your letter of intent and do all the project management for the procedure on the HTA side. We have now got what's called the Early Dialogue Working Party, which is a standing committee established by UNETA to do quality control and to also look at the prioritization criteria to decide which way the new application will go. So will it go consolidated or will it go individual? And all Early Dialogue Working Party members, and I'll tell you who they are in a minute, will participate in all of the consolidated procedures. Additionally, there is what's called the Early Dialogue Committee, which is for every advice specifically constituted, and it will fluctuate to a degree for each application, each procedure that goes through. And it will, for consolidated, it will include the Early Dialogue Working Party plus some others. Then there's also a scientific coordinator appointed by the HTAs and who will facilitate and attempt to consolidate and form a consensus position amongst HTAs because as you know, there are quite a few different HTAs and potential for different views. Although I have to say, with experience of seeing many of these coming through now, there is not as much divergence as one might expect a lot of the time, although there is some difference of opinions, obviously, but certainly it's very welcome to see this scientific coordinator leading on the scientific coordination amongst the HTAs. They also co-chair the face-to-face meeting. Now, we have the Early Dialogue Working Party, and we also have what I've mentioned as selection criteria to decide which variant, which subroutine the procedure will go for a HTA participation. And the Early Dialogue Working Party applies selection criteria. And these selection criteria are specified. There are various tick boxes and requests in the letter of intent. So you would have to support your and justify these elements when you're applying, so that the HTA, the UNETA Early Dialogue Working Party, will be able to decide which way to go with a consolidated or individual. And the selection criteria are a new mode of action for the indication, targeting a life-threatening or chronically debilitating condition, and responding to unmet need. They're also very keen that the studies haven't started, and I would say that they are more strict than the EMA is in terms of accepting procedures where the studies may have started or the program may be very advanced. But it is possible also to apply to parallel consultation also for post-licensing evidence generation. And indeed, there's a whole work package in Joint Action 3, as I mentioned, for UNETA, not just for early dialogues, but also for post-licensing. And we would position this platform as the way to go about getting advice on your post-licensing evidence generation with HTAs as well. So we have the Early Dialogue Working Party, and I mentioned that there's a slightly bigger group potentially for each procedure. So for a specific product, if it's going to go through consolidated, we look at the box on the left, there will be the EDWP, which is composed of GBA in Germany, and IPN from Hungary. There's an alternating seat between the Netherlands and Belgium. There's also NICE for England, HTAs, and there's also an alternating seat between AIFA and the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy. And they will also invite up to 3 other HTA bodies to participate in this EDC, as it's called, for consolidated. If it's an individual, if it's decided to follow an individual consultation, then the EDC is composed of various HTA bodies, which are invited by UNETA to express their interest in availability for participating. So it can be any number of HTAs that are willing and available. Now, company preferences are taken into account. So on the letter of intent, there is a box where you can say which HTAs you would prefer to have in your procedure, and this is taken into account, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be guaranteed. So just to summarize some of the similarities and differences between individual and consolidated from the HTA perspective. So for both of them, the HTA recruitment is centrally via the HTA Secretariat. What by that I mean, getting the HTAs to say they will come on board. The mode of participation for HTAs for consolidated is a full early dialogue working party, but up to 3 more. For individual, it's voluntary HTA participation. The eligibility criteria have been applied in the case of consolidated, but if these are not satisfied, then it would be an individual. The outcome, then, importantly, that you know that for consolidated, there would be a single written report from the HTA bodies. And this can be composed of single answers where there's a consensus on a position, but if even within the consolidated, if there is some divergence, then possibly there will be some individual answers within this single report, but you get it all in one document. For the individual procedure, then each HTA who takes part will give a written report, and that is excellent. So in the process there, I've just at a very high level just say that you start with the simultaneous notification, then you submit the draft briefing document around a month before, and then we have the evaluation phase, which is the same as normal scientific advice with a discussion meeting, because a discussion meeting is always planned for these procedures, which really is what I was going to say here. List of issues. And in the middle, then, we have what we call pre-face-to-face teleconference. Apologies for all the acronyms. And this takes place very shortly after we discuss the first reports in scientific advice. And the purpose is really to have a preliminary exchange of the scientific positions between regulators and HTAs, and really to see if there are very different views from regulators and HTAs and how it might be possible to solve some of these. These have been very constructive. The face-to-face meeting happens at the EMA, and there are 2 co-chairs, one from HTAs and one from regulators. And the meeting is approximately between 3 and 4 hours, depending on the complexity of the product. And the overall outcome for EMA is standard scientific advice. I've mentioned the outcomes already for consolidated and the individual, and they come around day 75 or within 15 working days of the meeting. But EMA and UNETA do exchange final letters. There is consent built into the consent from the applicant built into the letter of intent, where we ask you to consent to the exchange of relevant documents in the procedure. All right, just a few slides on the experience of what we've seen so far. So as you know, in scientific advice, it works on a batch system. So every month we have a whole new batch of advices procedures starting. So since we launched, we've had 4 batches start in August, September, October, and November. And you can see we've had various numbers, 2, 3, 1, 3, and 2 due to start in January. So we've not been overwhelmed, but still a good run through here. And in terms of the procedures in total, so we have 11 requests so far. 6 have started and 2 have crossed the finish line, because it takes time for these procedures to get through the different stages of the advice process. And the vast majority have been individual procedures, and we have 2 consolidated so far, and 1 is pending a decision. Most of the requests we've received so far have been in oncology indications. The 6th shouldn't be there, I'm sorry. We've had six oncology indications so far out of the 11, and then the rest have been a mix in dermatology, ophthalmology, metabolic, connective tissue. And patient representatives have been involved in all 6 started procedures. I would say that SMEs, orphans and ATMPs appear to be underrepresented, really. We've only had 1 out of the 11 have been an SME so far. And I would contrast this with, certainly in 2015, we had 30% of all our advice requests were from SMEs. So this is something that we need to think about. HTA numbers of participating. The average number is 4 HTA bodies in the individual one and 7 to 8 in the consolidated one. There was a request about which HTAs have taken part as a question that was pre-submitted, so I put this slide up to answer that, really. And I will start by saying that within UNETA Joint Action 3, Work Package A5A, which is early dialogues, there are 31 UNETA partners, HTA bodies, that are signed up to be involved in this work package. Obviously, not all of them are taking part in all procedures, but they are there. And I'm not going to tell you all the names that are there. If you just type UNETA Joint Action 3 into the partners into Google, you'll find them quite easily, or I can give you the link. But these are the ones that have taken part, and you have many of the usual suspects that you would expect: NICE, GBA, HTAs. So England, Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, and the others include regions in Spain, includes Austria, Zin, which is the Netherlands, Italy, and Norway. And the scientific coordinators have been spread out amongst these 4 HTAs. For a consolidated procedure, GBA and HTAs are sharing the different coordinatorships. So it's just a summary. It's a new platform. We think it's a very positive way forward with HTA recruitment being centralised. There is a standing working party which will give the consolidated HTA advice. It's definitely streamlined, and there's more HTA coordination. We're working together as equal partners with UNETA on this. There is no obvious contamination. Everybody is respecting the roles and remakes. It very much builds on the success that we've had before. It is a platform which is facilitating discussion on initial evidence generation, but also could be used for post-licensing evidence generation. And it could also be used for parallel qualification if you were so ambitious to do this route as part of a consortium. It's been launched in July, and we have early experience, but it's positive. I think we need to think about how can we encourage more procedures from SMEs, and what are the barriers. I will acknowledge several colleagues, EMA, UNETA, and certainly our SOAP colleagues from the NCAs, without which this would not be possible. Thank you very much.